You were told a degree is your golden ticket, your passport to success. Just go to school, get good grades, collect your diploma, and life will open its doors. Jobs, respect, stability. The degree is your key to freedom, right? But what if that same piece of paper that promises liberation is actually a subtle form of control? What if, instead of unlocking your potential, it locks you into a system where your worth is measured not by who you are, but by what you've certified? We don't question it. We frame it as progress. Education equals opportunity, but we rarely ask, opportunity for whom and at what cost? In a world obsessed with credentials, degrees often function less like tools for learning and more like tools for sorting, like silent gatekeepers deciding who gets access and who stays outside. They shape who is heard, who is hired, and who is silently dismissed before speaking. So today, let's challenge this sacred object. Let's explore how the modern obsession with diplomas might be less about enlightenment and more about obedience. Is the degree a step toward freedom, or just a prettier kind of chain? The Credential Trap. It starts innocently enough. You're told, get a degree and doors will open. You're sold a story that knowledge is power and education is freedom. So you follow the path: elementary school, high school, college, maybe grad school if you're really ambitious or scared. You collect certificates like they're keys to some secret vault called a good life. But somewhere along the way, you start to notice the degree isn't opening doors, it's proving you're allowed to knock. We live in a world obsessed with credentials, diplomas, licenses, accreditations. The assumption is, if you're qualified on paper, you must be competent in life. If you don't have the paper, your ideas suddenly weigh less, your voice gets quieter, your options shrink. The degree, once framed as empowerment, becomes a filter, not just of skill, but of status. The piece of paper becomes more important than the person holding it. This is the trap. Degrees no longer just certify knowledge, they signal belonging. They say, I went through the system, I followed the rules, I passed the tests. And for that, you get access to jobs, respect, certain rooms. Not because you're more capable, but because you're more compliant. The system doesn't reward intelligence, it rewards obedience dressed up as achievement. Let's be clear, this isn't about whether education is valuable. It is. Learning is sacred. But when education becomes confused with paperwork, we stop asking what someone actually knows and start asking what institution gave them permission to matter. It's less about enlightenment, more about hierarchy. And degrees, they become currency in a bureaucratic economy of credibility. Worse, the more people get degrees, the more you need one just to stand still. What used to be optional becomes mandatory. Jobs that once required experience now require a bachelor's. Entry-level roles demand master's degrees. And once everyone has one, welcome to the inflation of expectation. Now you're in debt, overqualified, and still unemployed because apparently you didn't get the right degree from the right place at the right time. It's a treadmill, and no one's allowed to get off. And what's the cost of all this? We don't just trade money for degrees, we trade years of our lives. Years spent memorizing, performing, regurgitating. Years jumping through hoops that measure conformity more than creativity. Because here's the quiet truth. The system doesn't want thinkers. It wants verifiers. People who've proven they can survive bureaucracy, that they can delay their instincts, that they can spend 4 years doing what they're told in exchange for a seal of approval. And let's not ignore the class divide hiding underneath the gown and cap. Who has the time and money to pursue a degree? Who can afford to invest in 4 years of unpaid study? Not everyone. And yet, we act like the absence of a degree equals laziness or failure, instead of recognizing that many people are excluded before they even begin. The credential economy doesn't create opportunity, it codifies inequality, just with fancier stationery. Even worse, we start internalizing the logic. We begin to doubt our worth without that official stamp. We feel insecure in rooms where others flaunt their alma maters. We apologize before speaking, saying things like, I didn't go to college, but as if lived experience needs institutional permission to be legitimate. And let's talk about those who do get degrees. Are they free, or are they just shackled in a nicer cage? Because once you invest so much time and money into a system, it becomes risky to question it. The degree becomes a sunk cost, and you become its most loyal defender. You defend it not because it liberated you, but because it shaped you. Because to admit the system might be flawed would mean admitting your sacrifices were in vain. So we perpetuate the trap. We demand degrees from others. We use them as shorthand for trust. We create job requirements that say, must have X diploma, even when the job itself doesn't actually need it. It's not about the role, it's about status signaling. The diploma becomes a password into legitimacy. Not, can you do this, but are you one of us? This is how the degree transforms from a key into a shackle. It's no longer just about what you've learned, it's about where you're allowed to go, who you're allowed to be. The world stops asking what you think and starts asking what institution trained you to think. And you know what's ironic? Some of the most insightful, creative, and capable people were the ones who walked away from the system, or were never invited in. But we ignore them, dismiss them, underestimate them because their knowledge isn't certified. It's raw, real, inconvenient, and the system has no frame for that. So where does that leave us? With a hard question. If the degree isn't really about learning, and it isn't really about merit, then what is it? Maybe it's a ritual, a rite of passage for modern adults, a cultural signal that you've been processed, that you've been filtered, shaped, and stamped. But here's a radical thought. What if you didn't need a stamp to matter? What if we started judging people not by credentials, but by curiosity? Not by GPA, but by insight? Not by where they studied, but what they actually say? Because the credential trap only works as long as we keep believing in it. The moment we ask, wait, who decided this paper defines me? That's when the chain begins to loosen. And maybe then, just maybe, we'll stop chasing validation and start reclaiming education. The degree as a status symbol. Let's stop pretending. A degree isn't just a piece of paper that says you learned something. It's a status symbol, a modern badge of social worth, a quiet way of saying, I belong. Sure, it's wrapped in noble language, education, excellence, achievement, but beneath the tassels and transcripts lies a deeper truth. The degree is often less about what you know and more about where you stand. Think about the way we talk about schools. Not what did you study, but where did you go? Because the where tells a story. Ivy League, elite. Community college, practical. No college, suspicious. We don't just associate degrees with knowledge, we attach them to moral character, ambition, discipline, drive. The right school adds polish, prestige, credibility. It's not an education, it's a brand. And like any good brand, it sells exclusivity. Top universities don't pride themselves on how many people they educate. They pride themselves on how many they reject. The lower the acceptance rate, the higher the value. It's not about access, it's about scarcity, about turning education into a luxury product with a limited supply and a very specific kind of customer. The degree in this context becomes more than proof of learning. It's proof of belonging to a tribe. This is where the illusion kicks in. We tell ourselves that degrees are about personal growth, about knowledge, but the world treats them like social currency. Employers don't just want skills, they want polish. Colleagues don't just respect experience, they respect the brand behind it. People say Harvard and rooms get quieter. People say online certification and eyebrows raise. It's the same human, same mind, different stamp. And here's the twist. The people who benefit most from the status of degrees are often the ones who needed them the least. They already had access, networks, family support. The degree is just the finishing touch, a final layer of validation. Meanwhile, those from less privileged backgrounds are told the degree will change everything. That it will, even the playing field. That it's the key to a better life. But too often, all it does is buy them entry into a world that still doesn't see them as equals. Because status isn't just about access, it's about recognition. And many graduates, especially those from working class, immigrant, or marginalized communities, find that the degree doesn't erase bias. It doesn't silence stereotypes. It doesn't suddenly make the world fair. They walk in with their diploma in hand, only to discover that the room they've finally entered is still shaped by invisible rules they were never taught. This is the quiet violence of the status system. It promises inclusion, but only on its terms. You can have a seat at the table, but don't speak too loudly. Don't challenge the norms. Don't bring your full self. Bring your credentials, your resume, your rehearsed lines. The degree becomes not just a door, but a muzzle. And for those who don't have one, the exclusion is even sharper. You're not just seen as less educated, you're seen as less capable, less smart, less trustworthy. We've created a hierarchy of legitimacy based not on ideas but on paper. A hierarchy that says unless someone in power certified your thinking, we don't have to take it seriously. This is why the degree obsession is so dangerous. It replaces curiosity with conformity. It replaces learning with signaling. And in doing so, it locks us into a cultural script. Go to school, get the paper, join the game. Never ask who wrote the rules. Never wonder if the prize is even worth the race. Even worse, it teaches us to distrust those who walk a different path. The artist without a BFA, the entrepreneur without an MBA, the thinker without a PhD. We dismiss them not because they lack value, but because they lack status. Their brilliance becomes invisible, simply because no institution gave them permission to shine. But what if we turn the question around? What if we stopped asking, "Where did you study?" and started asking, "What do you see that others don't?" What if the status symbol wasn't a diploma, but depth? Not prestige, but perspective? What if we valued insight over image? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Status doesn't equal substance. Plenty of people wear academic robes and say absolutely nothing of value. Plenty of others, silenced by the system, hold insights that could transform how we live, learn, and lead. But we won't hear them, because we're too busy checking resumes. We need to ask, who benefits from this obsession with status? Who gets to be seen as legitimate, and who is conveniently left out? Because as long as we tie worth to degrees, we will continue to confuse polish with power, and we'll keep mistaking the symbol of learning for the act of learning itself. The degree isn't the enemy, but the pedestal we put it on, that's worth smashing. It's time to reclaim the meaning of education. To see degrees not as social trophies, but as one of many paths to understanding. To stop worshiping the symbol and start listening to the substance. Because if we want a smarter, fairer, freer world, we need to start honoring minds, not just titles. The school-to-sorting pipeline. We like to think that schools are temples of learning, neutral spaces where everyone is given the same chance to grow, think, and thrive. But what if that's just a beautiful myth? What if schools aren't designed to liberate minds, but to sort bodies? What if the modern education system functions less like a launch pad and more like a conveyor belt, quietly labeling, categorizing, and slotting people into their appropriate place in the social machine? Welcome to the school-to-sorting pipeline. It begins early. Children are observed, measured, evaluated, test scores, behavior reports, reading levels. Before you can spell individuality, you're being ranked against your peers. Not for the sake of curiosity, but for prediction. Are you a gifted student or a problem? Are you Ivy League material, community college, or the "we hope you show up" category? By the time you're 10, the system already has a sense of where you belong. And by belong, it means where you should be placed. Let's be honest. Education, especially in large bureaucratic systems, doesn't treat students as evolving minds. It treats them as data points. You become a GPA, a percentile, a disciplinary statistic. It's not about what ignites your curiosity. It's about how efficiently you move through the funnel. Standardized tests don't ask what you love. They ask if you can replicate patterns. Creativity gets extra credit, if there's time. Originality, only if it fits the rubric. But the real goal isn't deep learning, it's compliance. The system rewards students who sit still, follow directions, meet deadlines, and don't ask too many inconvenient questions. If you can do that for 12 to 16 years, you get a certificate that says, this person can survive structured environments without disrupting the hierarchy. That's what most employers are looking for anyway. You're not being prepared to change the world, you're being prepared to fit into it. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the sorting process is not just about academic ability, it's deeply entangled with class, race, language, and behavior. A student who questions authority in a wealthy private school is seen as a future leader. That same behavior in a poor public school, a disciplinary problem. One gets a mentorship, the other gets detention. Same defiance, different consequences. This isn't education, this is social programming. The school-to-sorting pipeline trains you to internalize your label. You start believing the ceiling that was built around you. Told you're average, you stop pushing. Told you're a troublemaker? You live down to it. This is how systems of control reproduce themselves, by making people think their place in it is natural, like gravity, not policy. And it's not just students who are sorted. Teachers are sorted too. The best paid, most respected educators usually end up in schools with the fewest structural challenges. Under-resourced schools get teachers stretched thin, constantly rotating, burned out by the very system that claims to value passion. And students notice. They know when they're getting second-tier everything. That knowledge isn't explicit, but it cuts deep. Even the curriculum plays its role in sorting. In wealthier schools, students are taught to think critically, analyze systems, connect global ideas. In lower-income schools, students are taught to obey rules, pass tests, and focus on practical skills. Why? Because one group is being trained to lead and the other to follow orders. This isn't a conspiracy, it's a design. Let's look at tracking. It sounds benign, grouping students by ability, but it often functions as a lifetime sentence. Once you're tracked low, it's hard to get out. Expectations shrink, opportunities fade, and the damage isn't just academic, it's existential. You begin to see yourself not as someone with potential, but as someone with limits. The system never has to crush your dreams, it just forgets to offer them. And what about those who fall through the cracks? The students who never fit, who rebel, who resist the sorting process? They're punished, not supported, labeled as failures, dropouts, underachievers, not because they're incapable, but because they refused to play the game, because they asked why instead of how high. The school-to-sorting pipeline doesn't want rebels, it wants reliable participants, not citizens, workers, not visionaries, operators. It teaches just enough to function, but not enough to question the function. It educates, but only to the point where education reinforces the system itself. And for the few who succeed within the system, those who rise to the top, get the degrees, land the jobs, many find themselves exhausted, disconnected, hollowed out. Because success in a system that never asked who you truly are can feel like a very well-decorated prison. You followed all the rules, you wore the uniform, and now you're wondering why you feel so lost. Because being sorted is not the same as being seen. But it doesn't have to be this way. Education could be about awakening, not sorting. About helping each person discover not where they fit, but who they are. That would require dismantling the conveyor belt, rethinking the obsession with measurement, and creating spaces where curiosity is more important than conformity. It would mean admitting that we've built a system that sorts people like packages instead of nurturing them like people. It would mean asking harder questions, not just about what we teach, but why we teach it, how, and for whom. Because until we dismantle the sorting pipeline, education will continue to look fair, but function as a mechanism for quiet exclusion. Debt, dependency, and the diploma. Here's a funny thing about freedom. In modern society, you often have to go into debt to earn it. That's especially true in education. The very system that promises to set you free begins by chaining you to a number, a student loan, a payment plan, a contract with fine print. The diploma, supposedly your passport to independence, now comes with years, sometimes decades of financial dependence. You're not just graduating into adulthood, you're graduating into obligation. Let's talk about the numbers. In the United States alone, over 45 million people owe more than $1.7 trillion in student debt. That's not education, that's an industry. You go to college to invest in your future, they say. But investment implies return, and for many, the return is delayed, uncertain, or missing altogether. They leave school not with opportunity, but with anxiety. Their first steps into the real world are already weighted down. And here's the twist. The debt is marketed as empowerment. You're not being burdened, you're being given a chance. You're investing in yourself. Except in this version of investment, you have no assets, no collateral, and no guarantee that your degree will deliver what it promised. It's a gamble, and the house almost always wins. But student debt isn't just financial, it's psychological. It alters your choices. It shapes what jobs you take, where you live, how long you delay milestones like marriage, children, travel, or entrepreneurship. It narrows your imagination. You stop asking, what do I want to do with my life, and start asking, what will cover my monthly payment? The passion you dreamed of pursuing now has to pay off, fast, and that's the point. A person in debt is easier to control, easier to manage. They're less likely to take risks, speak out, or walk away. When your diploma is tied to a loan, and that loan is tied to your survival, education doesn't free you, it tames you. You become a more compliant worker, a more cautious citizen. Not because you're weak, but because the consequences of non-compliance are simply too high. The irony here is staggering. We call it higher education, but it often locks people into the lowest kind of existence. A life of quiet economic fear. You're told the degree gives you dignity, but when you're constantly negotiating between rent, interest rates, and basic stability, dignity starts to feel like a luxury item. Let's zoom out. Why is education so expensive in the first place? Is knowledge scarce? Are books hard to print? Are lectures made of gold? Of course not. The costs have soared because the system can get away with it, because we've convinced an entire generation that without a degree you don't matter. So people pay, they borrow, they bet their future, and the system cashes in. And if you think this is just about the US, think again. The same logic is spreading globally. In the UK, Canada, Australia, student fees are rising, private institutions are expanding, and learning is being slowly replaced by branding. Degrees are sold as products. Universities operate like corporations, students are customers, and education becomes less about critical thought and more about credential acquisition. But not all students are affected equally. As always, the burden falls harder on those already disadvantaged. First-generation students, low-income students, marginalized students, they take on more risk, more debt, and often receive less support. The system hands them a map but forgets to mention the mountains. Meanwhile, the wealthy bypass the trap altogether. They pay up front, they graduate debt-free. Their degree is just one of many assets, alongside trust funds, family businesses, and social capital. The diploma is a bonus, not a lifeline. They don't need the system's permission to dream. They already have a safety net. For them, education is enrichment. For others, it's escape, or at least the hope of it. And this is the quiet cruelty of the diploma economy. It dangles opportunity in front of those most desperate for it, then charges them the highest price to participate. It tells them you can be anything, while ensuring that what they can be is dictated by the cost of their ambition. And yet we keep selling the same story. Work hard, take out loans, graduate. Succeed. If it doesn't work, the fault must be yours, not the economy, not the predatory lenders, not the employers who ask for degrees, but pay starvation wages. No, your failure is personal. That's the most effective form of control, one where the system doesn't need to punish you because you've already internalized the shame. But what if we told a different story? What if we admitted that knowledge should never come with a price tag? That education should be a public good, not a private hustle? That debt doesn't motivate learning, it distorts it? That students shouldn't be forced to mortgage their future just to participate in the present? What if we built a world where a diploma didn't mean a decade of repayment plans and compromised dreams? Because education should expand your mind, not your monthly bills. Until then, let's stop pretending the diploma is a symbol of freedom. In many cases, it's a contract, a leash, a deal signed in youth, paid for in middle age. In the fine print, it says, "Welcome to adulthood. Please insert your soul, one installment at a time." Beyond the paper, rethinking value. Let's imagine a world where no one asks you where you went to school, where no one cares if you have a diploma framed above your desk, where your value isn't measured by paper, titles, or institutional approval, but by your insight, your presence, your way of seeing the world. A fantasy? Maybe. But what if it didn't have to be? Because here's the thing, we've confused credentials with capacity. We've built a culture that believes worth must be stamped, graded, and approved, like a product on a shelf. If you don't have the degree, you're defective. If you have the wrong one, you're discounted. We've let institutions monopolize the authority to define human potential. But what if we reclaim that power? Let's start with the obvious. Learning doesn't only happen in classrooms. Some people gain more wisdom from working a minimum wage job than others do from writing a dissertation. Some discover purpose while raising a child, traveling, surviving trauma, or building something from scratch. These are not gaps in education, they are education. But because they're not officially certified, they're treated as invisible. This is the tyranny of paper, the belief that only what is measured matters, that unless it comes with a seal, a score, a title, it's irrelevant. But this logic isn't neutral, it's colonial. It privileges a very narrow version of knowledge, analytical, textual, testable. It ignores emotional intelligence, relational wisdom, embodied understanding. It dismisses artists, caregivers, spiritual leaders, organizers, thinkers on the margins. And the result? A society drowning in diplomas but starving for depth. We have more degrees than ever, and yet we seem more anxious, disconnected, and disillusioned than ever before. The promise of education hasn't delivered the fulfillment we were sold. Because while school taught us how to pass exams, it rarely taught us how to live, how to relate, how to question power, how to know ourselves. So maybe it's time we ask, what is education for? Is it to signal status or to expand consciousness? Is it to train workers or awaken citizens? Because these are not the same goals, and the system you build will depend on the answer you choose. Right now, the dominant system is built to sort, certify, and standardize. It's optimized for efficiency, not transformation. It cares about credentials more than curiosity. But education, in its radical form, is not about control, it's about liberation. It's not about fitting in, it's about waking up. And waking up means unlearning the belief that you are only as worthy as your resume. It means seeing value in people who've never stepped foot in a university. It means questioning the quiet classism behind every job posting that says, degree required, without asking what kind of knowledge that really demands. It also means listening differently, listening to voices that weren't trained to speak in polished prose, listening to perspectives that weren't shaped in lecture halls, listening not for credentials, but for clarity, for truth, for resonance, for courage. This shift won't come from institutions. It will come from us, from employers who look beyond degrees, from educators who teach beyond the test, from individuals who choose to validate lived experience as deeply as they respect formal study. It will come from dismantling the hierarchy of knowledge that says only certain kinds of learning count. Because the truth is, wisdom is everywhere. It lives in the mechanic, the nurse, the street vendor, the grandmother, the dropout, the migrant. It can't be confined to campuses. It can't be captured in GPA. It can't be bought or borrowed. And it certainly doesn't need permission to matter. To rethink value is to remember that education was never supposed to be a tool of classification. It was supposed to be a tool of connection, a process of becoming more fully human together. It's not about getting ahead. It's about getting free. So yes, keep learning, but don't let a piece of paper define your journey. Don't confuse approval with awakening. Don't chase credentials at the cost of your soul. Because in the end, the most powerful form of education isn't the one that tells the world who you are, it's the one that helps you remember it yourself. We were promised that education would free us, that with a degree in hand, the world would open, the noise would quiet, and the path would be clear. But for many, the degree is not a door, it's a disguise. It hides inequality behind achievement, conformity behind merit, and anxiety behind ambition. We are told to chase credentials, but rarely asked who is writing the rules of the game, or why we believe the paper matters so much. This isn't a rejection of learning, it's a plea to reclaim it. Because real education doesn't come from a system that ranks and sorts. It doesn't require a certificate to be real. Real education happens when you begin to see differently, when you question power, make meaning, hold contradictions, and grow roots deeper than your resume. It happens in conversation, in struggle, in silence. And no one can grade that. We need to stop worshiping the paper and start listening to the person. Start asking deeper questions. What do you love? What do you see? What are you willing to unlearn? That's where intelligence lives. Not in test scores, but in curiosity. Not in credentials, but in courage. So the next time someone asks where you studied, try this. Tell them you're still learning and always will be. Because the only real degree worth chasing is your own unfolding. If this video sparked something in you, share it. With a friend, with your class, with your boss. Let's start conversations that cut deeper than credentials. Subscribe for more content that challenges the systems we live inside and the stories we tell about success. And if you've ever felt defined by a piece of paper or the lack of one, remember, you are not your diploma. You are your depth. Let's stop climbing ladders and start planting roots.